Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me on this episode of the Wine Guild. And today's story is going to take us into the night or back to the 1970s is when it starts. And as I do that, I'm going to pour myself a cup of tea with Nana's cups, of course. It's very rainy and it's not cold. It's very humid, but it's very rainy out. We just had a thunderstorm roll through, which kind of put a damper on all the summer activities. So I think the weather's perfect for a little tale on this Sunday afternoon. So tonight's tale is going to be something I call The Devil's Coat. That's going to be the title of it. And like I said, it takes place in the 1970s. And our story starts with a man by the name of Michael Hamilton, who was an American and was a cycling enthusiast, meaning bicycles. So for his 35th birthday, his wife purchased him a trip to the south of France to do a bike tour, because he always loved the Tour de France. You know, he's a bicyclist. You see them around these days. So Michael took this trip, and contrary to what most people say or think about the French people, he had always heard that they were rude, that they hated Americans, but he encountered nothing but kindness and courtesy. The people were very warm to him and open to him. So he went about his trip to the point where he thought it was safe to go off on his own and do a little touring outside of the tour guide or the tour plan on his bicycle. Since the people were so accommodating and so welcoming, he figured, why not? I'll go and check out the countryside. So one day on this trip, he took off out to the French countryside. And unfortunately, as he was going along, he encountered a pretty nasty storm. The rain started to come down in buckets. In fact, hail started to hammer him to the point that he really was concerned. He was on a bicycle. He didn't know if it was safe to continue on. He needed to do something to get out of it. And just as his fears are starting to build, the chain on his bicycle seems to be malfunctioning. So he jumps off the bicycle and decides, I need to seek shelter. The rain is bombarding him. He's drenched. The bicycle is not working properly at this point. And where he happened to stop, he happens to see two pillars on the road, two stone pillars, as if it was the markings of an estate. So he thinks to himself, well, wonderful. I'll go up here. Hopefully these people will be nice enough to let me stay inside until the storm passes. I'll fix my bicycle and I'll be on my way. So he makes his way up the driveway, so to speak. It's not much of a driveway. It's all gravel. And it's winding, and it's going quite a distance. And it's about 200 yards until he gets to where the actual house is, which turns out to be a very old chateau. In fact, it was so old that it was covered in vines and ivy to the point that it looked like no one had lived there in many years. So he was very discouraged now, because he was hoping that someone would be there to let him in. So the windows were boarded up. The other windows that were not boarded up were broken. So he goes up onto the porch of the chateau and knocks, and there's no answer. He begins to play with the door, and to his surprise, the door is unlocked. So he opens the door, and he enters the chateau. Now, there's no light outside. There's light outside because it is day, but it's pretty dim from the storm. And he's able to see shadows in the house, in the sense that light coming through the broken windows and through the cracks of the boarded windows. He could see that this was a pretty fine place at its time. It was must have been somebody with quite wealth, a bunch of wealth, to be able to live in such a place. So he looks around the open area, and he sees the remnants of what must have been furniture that has just crumbled over time. Most of the environment is covered in cobwebs and dust, and it's just a very creepy and uninviting place. But at this point, he's soaking wet. He really feels he has no choice. So he continues to enter the chateau. And as he's entering the chateau, he sees a stairwell, and he decides to proceed up the stairs in hopes that maybe he could find something upstairs, possibly in a bedroom or something which he could use to dry himself off. And he proceeds up the stairs. And as he's doing that, the stairs begin to creak. In fact, at one point, one of the stairs breaks through and his foot goes in. He's very uneasy at this point. What could happen? Could he fall through? And what, God forbid, he got injured? Would anyone ever find him? All his fears start to build at this point. He makes it to this top of the stairs, and as he gets to the top of the stairs, he begins to feel an eerie feeling, like something inside of him telling him not to proceed, not to go forward. Now, there was nothing physical that he could see or hear, but it was just this internal feeling inside of him that told him, don't go any further. And he decided to listen to himself and listen to this sixth sense of his. So he turns around and he proceeds down the stairs. He goes down to the first floor. And he decides, now, even though I'm not going to go upstairs, perhaps I can find something downstairs on the first floor that will be helpful. Perhaps there's a fireplace that I can light to dry my clothes. And sure enough, there was. To the left of the stairwell, there was what was once an old study. And he could even see the remnants of the old books and bookcases there, covered in dust and cobwebs, and an old desk. But in the corner, there was a pretty large fireplace. And his mind is wandering at this point. How can I do this? How can I get a fire going in this damp, dingy, musty smelling house? There has to be something I can burn. So at that point, he turns around and goes outside and says, well, this is just a chateau, but it has a lot of things. It has multiple buildings. It has a barn. It has a carriage house. Perhaps there's something in there. So he proceeds to wander around the premises a little bit as the rain is pummeling. Like I said, he's soaking wet. And he's able to gather up some types of wood, remnants of old buildings or remnants of old siding and such, that he brings it inside. Now he's wet. The wood is wet, but he gives it a shot. He puts the wood into the fireplace, begins to light it, and it starts to smolder a little bit. He happened to have matches on him in his bicycle kit that he carries with him, his emergency kit. So he was able to light it, but it was not doing much but smoldering. He wasn't getting the fire, the flames, or the heat that he needed. And as this is going on, he suddenly hears something in the hallway, some type of ruffling or rustling in the hallway. And as he does that, he proceeds to turn around and go over to the doorway of the study and look out into the hallway. And what he sees is, he sees an old suit hanging in what must have once been a closet, but the doors have long since crumbled away. But hanging there in the hallway was an old military suit. He recognized it from an era of the early 1800s, perhaps the 1700s. Very old, very dusty, almost falling apart, moth-ridden. And he also happened to notice, as he looks at this suit or this jacket, that it happens to have a hole in the back of it, about a dime-size hole, not made by a moth. It wasn't a random ripping or anything, but it was a distinct hole through the back of the jacket. So he doesn't think much of it at the time, and he goes back inside and proceeds to work on his fire. He's blowing on the fire, he's kneeling down, blowing on it, trying to get some type of combustion to get the heat that he needs. And as he's doing this, he once again hears something in the hallway. He hears a ruffling. So this time he goes back and he looks again, and he sees where the jacket is. The jacket's still there, but there's a bunch of dust that's been disturbed, a kind of a cloud of dust. And he dismisses it saying, huh, must be a rat or some type of critter that has made their home in this abandoned chateau. Must be ruffling around. So he goes back to his fire, begins to work on his fire again. But then he hears it a third time. He hears a noise, and this time he hears a very chilling, demonic chuckle in addition. And as he hears this, the hairs on his arms begin to stand up and on the back of his neck. A chill shoots down his spine. He proceeds to go over, and this time he doesn't look out, but he proceeds to close the door. Now, why he closed the door, he doesn't even know. The fact is, it was purely instinctive. He was trying to put something between him and this noise that was giving him this awful feeling. So as he closes the door, he backs away slowly towards the fire. And as he's doing that, he sees the doorknob to the study start to turn. Now, at this point, his fears are running rampant. Could someone be in the chateau that he did not see? Is this the owner that's going to be mad as hell at him? And as he does this, he grips onto a pistol he had, which he carried with him. He had taken an old Luger with him that his father had given him for protection. And he had kept it in a satchel that was on the bicycle, which he took inside with him. So he puts his hand on his Luger, and he's ready. He's afraid of what might come through that door. And as the door slowly creaks open, he holds the gun up, ready to shoot any demon type of creature that's coming through at him. But as the door opens up, he sees not an animal, not a man, but the suit. He sees the coat. He sees the military coat suspended in the air by nothing, suspended completely in the air, kind of swaying back and forth, suspended somehow. Now, he cannot believe his eyes. What has happened? What is doing this? Is this a joke? Is this some type of tactic to scare him away? But instinctively, he drops his gun, thinking, what can a gun do? What can a gun do against this suit? So as he does that, he notices the suit begins to start to proceed towards him. The coat proceeds towards him. And as the coat proceeds towards him, its arms start to go up and hold out as if invisible hands were reaching for him. And step by step, it goes closer towards him. And he hears the laughter. He hears laughter and chuckling that's coming from the vicinity of the suit. And as he backs off step by step, it becomes closer. It gets closer and closer. And suddenly, as this is happening to him, he remembers something in his childhood, something that told him that how to ward off evil would be to do the sign of the cross. So he does this, and he's not been a religious man. He has not been a religious man at all. So why this popped into his head, he doesn't know. But he does the sign of the cross, as if this was the only thing that could possibly protect him from this approaching evil. And as he does this, he notices the suit suddenly stops moving. The hands are still out, reaching towards him. The sleeves are still out, reaching toward him, but it stops moving. But it only stops momentarily. And then it starts coming forward again. And he steps back again and again. And he's to the point where he's against the fireplace itself. And he feels the little bit of heat on his backside as the smoke begins to rumble up above him. And he feels around, petrified at this point to what is happening. And as the suit gets closer and closer, he feels icy cold grip around his neck, as if someone in that suit was reaching out and about to strangle the life from him. And as this is happening, he feels his throat getting closing and closing, and he feels his breath going out of him. And as he's doing this, and now he's struggling, there's nothing for him to put his hands on to take away this feeling. There were no material things on his neck that were causing this. And as he did this, in a sheer panic, he wailed his arms back, and as he did that, he felt what was the top of an old poker. And as he did, he grabbed that poker, and with all his might, he swung it around and hit the coat. And as he hit the coat dropped to the ground, completely as if it was an old rag. Now, at this point, he drops the poker and runs for the door of the study and into the hallway. And at this point, he still can't believe what has happened, but he can at least breathe now. And he feels that he needs to get out of this place before it's too late. But something is telling him to look back before he does it. He just can't help but look back. And what does he do? He looks back, and what does he see? He sees the suit trying to rematerialize as it starts to shimmy and starts to rise again. Now with this, he panics, and he runs out the door into the storm, down the stairs, down the porch, down the driveway, all the way to the road in a sheer panic. He left his bicycle there, he left his bag there, he left everything there. He begins to run down the road. He makes it to the road and he begins to run towards the road and run and run and run until he finally sees an inn. And as he sees this inn, he basically has run miles at this point out of pure adrenaline and fear that he collapses on the front steps of this inn. And at that point, people who happen to be in the inn see this happening and come out and grab him drag his limp body back into the common area of the inn. And at this point, he's soaking wet, obviously, and he's completely exhausted. He's run for miles. He can barely speak. They drag him in. They put him on a couch. The innkeeper and his wife are there. And he hears the innkeeper yell in French, "Bring wine, bring wine. He's going to need wine." And they do. They bring wine. And he begins to sip the wine. And as he begins to sip the wine, he begins to come out of this a bit to the point where he can talk. And he remembers some French. He had some French from high school. And so he's able to communicate a little bit. And they were able to speak some English. So at this point, he begins to relay what he experienced. And as he does this, he sees the looks on their faces. And they're not looks of people that are in disbelief at all. Nor are they looks of, "You're crazy." They're looks of concern. And the innkeeper basically says to him, "So you went into that chateau?" And he said, "Yes, that's where this happened to me. That's where this event happened to me." And at this point, he says, "Never go into that chateau." And at this point, he motions over to an old man who had been sitting in the corner in what appeared to be his normal place. Looked like he belonged there and had been there forever. The old man saunters over with his cane and pulls up a chair next to Mike and begins to tell him a little bit about that chateau. And begins by saying, "We all thought and prayed that the German bombs during the war would destroy that, but unfortunately it did not. And none of us go into that. And none of us ever should go into that. And I can tell you, from my family has been here for generations, that chateau was once owned by a man of immense evil. This man, who was named Colonel d'Aymeric, worked for or was in Napoleon's army during the Napoleonic Wars. And Colonel d'Aymeric was notorious for being an evil, destructive person. In fact, many of the generals of Napoleon's army never wanted to deal with him. And Napoleon, however, kept him around for special occasions because he seemed to have a way to win when times the odds were way against them. And many people said that this was because he was, in fact, dealt in the dark arts and spent many a time with the devil. Now, the victories that he won, that he should not have won, did not come free. They came with a cost. And the cost of that often was paid through the prisoners that they captured at the end of each battle, where the colonel would personally strangle them to death at his leisure. And people would say that he took this as quite pleasurable, that he would do this and purely out of fun, that he was such an evil man that even Napoleon, who was said to never fear anyone, was very uneasy in his presence, but knew the necessary evil and had to keep him around. So this man, Colonel Dumeric, after the wars, retired to this chateau with his wife and daughters. And it wasn't long before his sadistic and evil ways started to affect his family. And his family, his wife and daughters, the neighbors would hear screams coming from the chateau all the time. And many a time a delivery would be made there, and the wife of the colonel would come to the door, and the physical damage on her would be seen. And the children were never seen in public once they went into that chateau. They never went to school. They never had any friends come over. And it went on for quite a while until one day shots were heard from the chateau. And when the authorities went there, the local authorities actually went to the chateau, what they found was that the colonel's wife had been strangled to death by him, and the colonel himself was dead through a bullet in his back, which the trigger was pulled by his daughter. And ever since this tragedy happened, the chateau was never inhabited. So you're talking about almost 200 years where this chateau has sat empty. His surviving daughters moved away, and he and his wife were buried. Now, he was not allowed to be buried in the church, in the local churchyard, because the local priest said he was evil and could not be buried on hallowed ground. So he was buried on the grounds themselves. But his wife was buried in a churchyard. So it's said that his bones are on that chateau someplace. So Michael Hamilton, having gone through this trip, collected his faculties, thanked the inn for their help, and returned never to come again to the south of France. Because no matter how well or how loving and welcoming and opening the people might be, you never can tell when you might take a wrong turn and find yourself in the house of the devil. Thanks for watching.